Thank you so much for joining us for this special Patreon-backed interview episode of The Dukes of Dice, which we're now calling Holding Court, and I am pleased and honored to be joined by Chris Kluwe, former NFL punter and current game designer. Chris, how are you doing today?
I am doing fantastic. How's it going?
So I gave a little bit of the quick synopsis, but for folks who hadn't heard of you, weren't aware of you, what's the quick bio on Chris Kluwe?
Well, I played in the NFL for 8 years for the Minnesota Vikings, so that's probably the primary reason that people know me. And then I've also been a video gamer, tabletop gamer, pretty much my entire life. Ever since I was, I think, like 8, I got my first Nintendo Entertainment System, and been addicted to those ever since. And now I've created a card game called Twilight of the Gods that we're very excited about because I played Magic a ton growing up, and I love Magic, but there's some flaws in Magic that I was hoping to fix, and I think we've done that. So it's been a great experience testing it and playing it, and I can't wait for people to get it in their hands. So I like to stay busy. I also wrote a couple books. One's called Beautifully Unique Sparkle Ponies. The other one's called Prime, a Genesis series event. That one's a sci-fi book. Sparkle Ponies is more a collection of short stories and essays. And then I was bassist in a rock band called Tripping Icarus. So yes, staying busy.
Yeah, quite busy it sounds like, and as we're talking to you, you just got done with some rock climbing. So
yes, yeah. Oh yeah, I was on American Ninja Warrior last year, I think it was. So that was fun. I failed on like the 5th obstacle, but it was a blast.
Oh man, did you get to the warped wall at least?
No, which sucks because like I could do the warped wall in the gym because I'm tall, but I went out on it was like a combination salmon ladder / like uphill rung thing, and I got like halfway through and just couldn't figure out how to swing from one hoop to the next.
Nice. And you're also the first ever tabletop champion that we've had on this on this show.
Oh yeah, Will's show. Yeah, that show's a lot of fun. I greatly enjoyed playing. What was that?
Champions
Midgard Warriors, I think. Yeah, Champions of Midgard. That's what it was. Because when we were doing, so they had us do a quick run through, before we actually filmed the episode, so everyone can be familiar with the rules and everything. And I was looking at it, I'm like, I think I could grief everyone and still win the game. I'm going to try to do this. And then their expressions when they finally caught on to what was happening, it was glorious.
Oh, and well, that has to be satisfying too, always to get Will Wheaton in his own game.
Yes, yeah. No, it's always fun playing those games with Will because he just has terrible luck, and I'm also someone who generally has terrible luck in like dice rolling types of games. There was one time I was playing Warhammer Fantasy, and I rolled 16 dice and got 13 ones. So that was feels bad, man.
Brutal. So you mentioned some games that you liked playing growing up, Magic being one of them. What were some of the other tabletop favorites that had caught your attention when you were a kid?
Clue was actually a really big one. Really liked playing Clue. Just, trying to figure out who did it. Invariably, it was Colonel Mustard in the library with
always Colonel Mustard.
But, yeah, I don't know what it is with that guy, but he's not a good dude. But mainly Clue, and then we had Stratego. Actually, that was a fun game. Me and my brother used to play that a lot. That was the one with the little they're the plastic figures. Like you can only see your side, right, with the numbers. Yeah. And like the lower number beats the higher number, except if you run into a bomb and then you die, but a spy can disable the bomb or take out the general, I think it was.
Right.
So yeah, it was always at first we would always throw our flags in the corner surrounded by bombs, but then once we figured out that we were both doing that, me and my brother, then we're like, okay, we got to come up with some different strategies.
So as you were growing up, obviously as a jock to some degree, did you find that nerd culture tended to conflict a lot, or was it something that you were able to kind of have the best of both worlds with?
Yeah, so for me, I always regarded myself growing up as more of a nerd who also happened to be good at sports. So like the people I hung around with, like we were all big into video games. We'd watch anime and talk about like science fiction books and stuff like that. So for me, it was definitely more like I would have been perfectly content just sitting on the couch playing video games and just doing general nerd stuff. But my parents were also of the belief that, okay, if it's daylight outside, then you need to be outside doing something. And I also happen to be very good at sports. And I discovered I liked being good at sports. I liked winning. So it was just one of those things that as I got older, I was like, I'm just going to do both of these. Like, why can't I do both of these? I think it's silly that, people think you should do one or the other. Do both if you want to do both.
Makes sense. Yeah. And as someone who was a rabid hockey fan growing up, but also a rabid video game, board game kind of nerd, and a lacrosse player at the same time, not at anywhere near the level that you got to, but I kind of get that divide sometimes. And
Yeah, for sure it was there. I mean, because like I'd be in the locker room, right, and before games or whatever, I'm bored, so I'm just reading, science fiction, fantasy books, and everyone's like, "Why are you reading those books? What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, we're not playing the game right now, so I'm trying to keep my mind occupied." But yeah, it was definitely got some of that. I don't think I was ever really considered a jock by the other guys on the teams.
Fair enough. What was the gaming culture like in an NFL locker room? I mean, did you have folks to play with, or did you have to kind of go outside the team a lot of times for that?
So it was interesting because when I first got into the NFL, the culture of video games was very much not really something that people did, because at that time the veterans, like 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8 year guys, they had all grown up in like the 80s, early 90s, and that was still kind of the whole jock geek divide. And it was more like, why are you playing video games? But then as I stayed in the league and I became the 4th year veteran, 5th year veteran, 6th year veteran, the younger guys that were coming in were very much in tune with video games because they'd grown up with consoles in the household. They'd grown up with a PC in the household. It wasn't this thing that you do in your parents' basement. It was part of society. Everyone plays video games. And so it was really cool to see that, where now all of a sudden it's like, yeah, I can have conversations with guys about video games. And granted, a lot of them were more into like the AAA type titles, like Grand Theft Auto, God of War, sort of more the mainstream type games. But there were also some guys who were like into MMOs and stuff. Like there were a couple guys I played with who played World of Warcraft. I don't think on the same level as I was in terms of like rating and being that serious into the game. But they were definitely playing. And then there was one guy I met who I think was probably more hardcore into gaming than I was, because he was playing Final Fantasy 12. And that was was it 11 or 12? The first MMO that came out for Final Fantasy. That just had that brutal grind. Like you could solo to like level 5, but then you had to group with people after that.
Oh, man. Okay.
Yeah, it was a grind and a half. But I was like, all right, mad respect to you. Because I called it quits after like level 8 in that game.
Any tabletop games that you guys would get in, or was that less of a thing when you were in the league?
Yeah, that wasn't really much of a thing. Although, funnily enough, actually a lot of guys play dominoes. So I don't. Okay. That's one of the original tabletop games. But yeah, nothing like Catan although I know some of the Green Bay linemen played Catan a lot.
Yeah, there was a whole huge thing. Wall Street Journal covered that one pretty extensively.
Yeah, so in the Vikings locker room, not really any tabletop stuff. It was funny though. I would bring in because at the time I was big into War Machine from Privateer Press, and so sure. I'd bring in my miniatures and paint them, because we'd have a lot of downtime during the day, when all the other guys are at meetings. As special teams, you're like, okay, we have our meetings in the morning, we work out, and then we wait for practice. So I was like, well, I'm going to fill the time and I'm going to paint some miniatures. So I'd be posted up in the middle of the locker room, right at the table, and painting my miniatures. Nice.
Did you get a lot of grief for that?
No, not really. Because at that point, I think I was like 5 or 6 years in. And so, most of the guys was like, yeah, that's just what he does. And like it was because we had a players lounge too, where they had like a PS2 set up and an Xbox 360. And that was when Guitar Hero was really big. And so I'd either be in there shredding on Guitar Hero or painting miniatures. And like the guys very quickly figured out, okay, yeah, that's just what Chris does.
When you're gaming online as someone with some degree of notoriety, I mean, is that something you're wearing on your sleeve, or is that something you try and keep a little more secretive?
Generally, for the most part, I kept it to myself, because it was more, I just want to play the game. The only time I ever deliberately told people who I was when I was applying to the top tier rating guild in World of Warcraft that I really wanted to get into. And so I was like, yeah, I'm a troll rogue. Here's my DPS rotations. Here's my gear. And I also play on the Vikings. Please pick me. So they actually ended up letting me in. And I think we were like number 3 in the US at one point. And, it was definitely work. Like I made sure I studied for that. Like I knew what my rotations were. I knew what the boss strategies were. Like I wasn't just there to kind of hang out. I was like, I want to beat this content. So it was a lot of fun.
Was there a lot of Packers trash talk in connection with that?
There actually was, because one of the co-guild leaders is actually a huge Packers fan, and he has, the stock certificate that proclaims him a part owner of the team. So it was really funny.
Oh, I'm surprised they let you in with that then.
Yeah, yeah, he was a co-leader, not the leader.
Oh, okay, good to know. Oh
Yeah.
man, so during that time, not a lot of tabletop gaming in the locker room, and it sounds like the rest of it was keeping you pretty busy. So was that kind of a period of time where, yeah, you mentioned some miniature play with War Machine. Anything else that you would get to the tabletop kind of during that time, or did you have so many other things on tap?
Yeah, it was pretty much a lot of other things because at that time I was War Machine was taking up a lot of my time in terms of like tabletop stuff, and then I was still raiding fairly heavily in WoW, so that's another big time sink. I did, however, I think I started playing Commander around that time for Magic because the place I played at, Tower Games in Minneapolis, that's where I played War Machine. And then one day, a couple of the guys were like, "Hey, there's this new format for Magic out." And I checked it out. I'm like, "Oh, this is awesome because now I can use all my old cards." And it's not just you buy the best deck and win. It's, oh, let's make fun combos and do silly things in this. So yeah, Commander was a lot of fun.
Gotcha. I think I'd be pretty remiss if I didn't ask you if you're a Blood Bowl fan.
Yes, Blood Bowl. So I do have to admit I have never played Blood Bowl. I always saw it set up in the Games Workshop bunker that I used to play 40K at. But yeah, I don't know. Like for some reason, sports games have just never really appealed to me. Like I've always been really bad at them. I mean, I've tried playing Madden and FIFA and games like that, and I'm just like, why am I playing this? I could just go outside and do this. Like I don't want to do what I do normally. I want to swing a sword or throw spells or whatever.
Well, and in Madden, if you're punting on first down every time, I don't think that's a successful strategy, Chris.
Yeah, probably not. And then in Madden, in most cases, it's better not to punt. It's like, just go for it.
Yep, just about every time. One other football-related question that we got, we sourced some questions through our Board Game Geek Guild number 2008. Jeff Rademacher was curious, when did you get chills while you were in the NFL? Were there places and times where you'd kind of geek out or be able to take a step back and realize, oh man, there's a lot of people here watching me play?
Yeah, so I never really got the kind of like, oh, there's a lot of people watching me, because that was just, it comes with a job. It's like, if you're not used to that by that point, then you probably won't have made it to that point. But for me, really kind of the big like eye-opening moment was actually the preseason of my rookie year when I was with the Seahawks. And in college, actually, the only football video game I played was NFL 2K1 because my roommate had it on the Dreamcast. And I just play as the Rams and run slants all day, and it's like, oh look, Isaac Bruce scored another touchdown.
Nice.
Easy game. But anyway, so I remember playing that in college, and then I walked onto the field for the preseason practices, OTAs, minicamps and stuff, and I'm looking around, I'm like, that's Matt Hasselbeck, that's Steve Hutchinson, that's Sean Alexander. Like, I recognize these guys from the game. And at that point it's like, okay, this is the NFL, I guess. So yeah, that was pretty much the only kind of like eyes wide, whoa, this is crazy. And then after that, it's like, all right, well, I got to do my job or I'm not going to be around. So then I was focused on doing my job.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, just like punching the clock at anywhere else, except maybe a bit of a different scale.
Yep.
just a little bit different. So you get out of the NFL not necessarily by choice, and that was
Nope.
very, very well covered. And Jeff was also curious about that. He was curious. You are known as being an activist voice for same-sex marriage and other causes. Have you found that to be a net positive in your life in general and in gaming, whatever context it comes up in?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, because the thing is that like I always get asked from people, hey, would you, like, knowing what you know now, would you do it again? Like knowing you would lose your job. I'm like, yeah, of course I would do it again, because the thing is that yeah, football was fun, and sure, I missed the paychecks. Like, who wouldn't miss the paychecks?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like, if we don't live in a society that is the foundations are secure and that people have the freedom to live their own life, well, then eventually that society is going to crumble and fall. And then football really won't mean anything because there won't be anyone around to watch or play it anymore. Like, we'll all be too busy hunting for food. So it's like, yeah, you can value things. I mean, it goes for any type of entertainment, whether it be sports, board games, video games, whatever it happens to be. Don't forget what gives that, a place to exist, like, and that's society as a whole. So if our society as a whole isn't stable, then we're going to have some real issues. And part of this is because I was a history and poli-sci major in college. And so, you see a lot of these same patterns repeat themselves. And it just I've always felt that, yeah, entertainment's fine, but at the end of the day, you got to make sure that people are free to live their lives, because if not, then eventually they're going to get to the point where they'll do whatever they want or whatever they can in order to live their lives. And at that point, that's where you run into, societal issues.
Fair enough. Makes sense. So you're out of the league again, not so much by choice. What got you towards game design? You certainly had plenty of nerdy hobbies, as we talked about, and certainly as a Magic fanatic. How did you get from out of the NFL to publishing a tabletop game?
Yeah, so it was actually an idea I'd had bouncing around in my mind while I was playing, because, like I said, I love Magic. I've played Magic ever since I was a kid, but one of the things that really pisses me off in Magic is getting mana screwed, because you don't get to play with your toys, right? Like, it's like, great, I've got this handful of cards and I can't do anything. Like, maybe I had a great draw. I have 4 plays and 3 lands, and sure, I'm going to curve out. It's going to be fantastic. And then you don't draw any lands. It's like, well, this sucks. My opponent just won and I'm just sitting here not doing anything. So one of the big things I wanted to try and fix was, the idea of getting mana screwed and make it so where, players couldn't get mana screwed. And then another issue I have with Magic, and this is more in terms of card design as opposed to kind of a fundamental mechanic, is the ability to make permission decks is really not fun because one person is playing the game and the other person is watching that person play the game. So it's, our design philosophy with Twilight of the Gods, with making this game, was that everyone should be able to play with their toys, and players should always have meaningful choice. It's not, here's your auto include cards, you put these 5 cards in, you're going to win the game. It's no, all these cards matter. They might matter in different situations. Some might be better in certain situations, some might be less effective in others. But at the end of the day, it's on your skill as a player to win the game, not did I draw enough mana or did my opponent run out of counterspells. Got it.
So that's what inspires the design. How did you hook up with Victory Point Games? What was the process of that like?
Yeah, so the game itself, Twilight of the Gods, it started with basically me and my brother at my dining room table. I got a big sheet of paper, and at this point, it wasn't called Twilight of the Gods yet. It was just kind of like working title. And so
insert title here.
Yeah, pretty much. God, what did I call it? I can't even. I think I called it Influence or something like that. But so anyway, so we set out like, okay, what are the core rules of the game going to be? And so pretty much for about, I want to say 3 years, we worked on getting, okay, how are the core rules working? Are they solid? Do they allow for instances of unfun play? And so once we got those pretty much set in stone to where, okay, now we feel like we've got something we can work with, then it was like, okay, now how do we flesh it out? Like, what are the factions going to be like? How are the cards interacting with each other? That took another like 1.5 2 years. And at that point, we were at a point where we felt like, okay, we've got a game. Like we feel like this is pretty good. We feel the mechanics are very sound. We feel it's interesting to play. We were having a lot of fun play testing it. And so then one of the other guys on my team, so it's me, my brother, Greg, one of our friends, Chris Morgan, and then another one of our friends, Justin Nugent, who we had met those two back when I had a game store in Costa Mesa. But anyway, so it's the four of us working on it, and Justin had taken a class in college on game design, and the teacher of the class was Alan, the head of Victory Point Games. And so after we felt like we were in a good spot with the game, we're like, hey, now we should start looking for a publisher. And Justin's like, oh, well, Alan is he's great at this. He teaches the class and everything. And so it's like, cool, well, let's go show it to him. And then he was very excited. The other people at Victory Point Games came in, looked at it, they're like, yeah, this is really cool. And so then we sat down and hammered out a contract and how are we going to market this thing? What's it going to be about? And Twilight of the Gods was born.
Very nice. So you kind of gave the bigger sell. It's something that plays similarly to Magic, but fixes some of the issues where it comes to mana screw. What are some other differentiators? What are some other differences players will expect when they get to sit down and play this one?
Yes, the unique mechanics. I love our unique mechanics. So the first one is the only way you generate resources in this game is by trading cards with each other. So each card has the front of the card obviously tells you what the card does, what kind of card it is, and then the back of the card is actually a resource level. So we call them tiers 1, 2, or 3. They have a cool little picture, and like tier 1 is bronze, tier 2 is silver, tier 3 is gold. So when you're looking at the back of another player's hand, you have some knowledge of the power level of their hand, but you're also looking at it as that is your pool of resources. And in order to get those resources, you have to offer cards from your own hand. So generally trades are made on a 1-to-1 basis. So you'll be like, I'll trade you a tier 1 for a tier 1. And since you can only put cards into play if you have resources to put those cards into play, both players at the start of the game are generally very cooperative with each other. Because they're like, yeah, we got these cards. We want to play the game. And then right around, it's generally turn 5 or so, it becomes very competitive where it's like, I think I have enough resources. I'm not trading with you anymore. So yeah, then you can see the shift happen like in real time. And it's so much fun to watch. And then we also have another mechanic to seize a resource from the other player, but it requires dumping cards from your own hand. So you're giving up card advantage to do it. So we really wanted to incentivize people to be cooperative at first and then be competitive later on. So that's probably our main unique mechanic when compared to games like Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon or stuff like that, is that you actually are trading cards with the other player. And then to go along with that, the cards you trade with the other person, they're not just resources, they're also traps. So every card at the bottom of the card has what's called a heresy effect. And there are ways to manifest those cards while they're in your opponent's resource area. And when a card is manifested, you resolve the heresy effect, which is generally bad for the person it's in front of. Then at the end of the turn, the card flips back face down again and gets randomized if there's more than one. So it's this really cool kind of like, I want to play these cards and I need resources, but I know these resources are traps, but I'm also giving my opponents traps. And there's this whole metagame going on where it's, can I outthink my opponent? Can I outplay my opponent? Because then it's not really on RNG so much as it is on how good are you as a player.
Got it. And there's a number of factions in the game from kind of looking at it, right? You have Sanctuary faction, Negotiation faction, Aggression faction, and Mysticism faction to kind of build your deck around, right?
Correct. Yeah. So one of the cool things that having a faction agnostic resource system allows us to do is that, so in Magic, right, you're limited to the 5 colors. You have red, black, white, green, blue, and then colorless, so 6 colors. Whereas ours, since we're only using tier 1s, 2s, and 3s, you can make your deck out of any combination of colors that you want. And we also are planning on adding in more factions as time goes on. So and our factions are built around sort of philosophies. So for example, our starting 4 factions, aggression is about being aggressive. You want to be constantly attacking. You want to be doing damage to your opponent and to yourself because that allows you to do some cool bonus effects. Sanctuary, you're all about defending yourself. So you have lots of ways of healing. You have lots like bigger creatures that take a while to get out, but they're very, they have a lot more life than other creatures and they can take more of a beating. Negotiation is all about sort of trickery and, negotiating with your opponent, and that would you like to trade? And then you start you get a whole bunch of manifest effects in the blue faction, Negotiation, and now your opponent's like, oh dang it, I probably shouldn't have negotiated with them. So, and then Mysticism's about pretty much just like fun spell effects. Like they do a lot of stuff with their discard stack, aka the graveyard, where they'll destroy their own cards in order to do effects that either heal themselves or damage the other opponent. Because one of the other big things that differentiates us from other card games is that in this game, your life is the number of cards in your deck. So each player starts with 50 cards, 50 life. Once your deck is gone, that's it. You are dead. So you'll get to see every card in your deck because when you take damage, cards flip off from your life stack into your discard stack. And then your opponent can also destroy cards from the discard stack to get them permanently out of the game because there's lots of ways of returning cards from your discard stack back to your life stack. So they're, again, meaningful player choice where, okay, do I go for current health and try to burn them down and hope that they can't heal enough? Or do I go for their max health and start taking their cards out of the game permanently so that way they can't get them back, even though it'll take a little bit longer? Or do I do a mix of the two, depending on what I'm facing?
So I think important for folks to know this is not a CCG. This is closer to an LCG or and I think you guys have it listed on there as an expandable card game.
Yeah. So we can't call it a living card game because Fantasy Flight apparently has that copyrighted. So I was tempted to call it an undead card game.
Interesting. Okay.
I figured everyone would just think, oh, it's a zombie game. I'm like, no, it's not a zombie game. So yeah, we went with updatable or expandable or whatever it is we're calling it. It's basically an LCG, but we just can't call it an LCG. So, and what that means for folks who aren't familiar with the difference is a CCG, Magic, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, you're buying packs of cards and it's random what cards you're going to get. So essentially you're chasing for the rare cards. LCGs are, you know exactly what you're getting when you buy a pack. You'll always get the same cards in the same pack. And usually they're quite a bit cheaper because you don't have that random element built in.
And everyone's going to have access to the same cards. In some
Correct.
cases, you might have to buy more sets of the game to build a full deck or truly full deck in some ways, right?
Yeah. So one of the things we did is so with the core set, there are a lot of 1-ofs and 2-ofs of cards. I think we only have like 3 or 4 cards that are 3-ofs. And the reason why we did that is because we wanted to make sure there was a big enough card pool for that initial core set that we could have a variety of decks. And then the plan going forward is every mini expansion and big expansion that releases from here on out will have 3-ofs of any new card that is introduced. Our card limit in a deck is 3-of, which is why I'm saying 3-ofs. So any new card that's introduced will have 3-of that card, and then we'll also be backfilling in the core set. So if you have to have all the core set cards now, like you've got to build the best deck, you'll probably want to buy 3 of the core sets. If you're willing to wait over 2, 3, 4 years, you know, however long it takes, if you buy 1 of everything, eventually that core set will be entirely filled in.
Okay, understood. What was the biggest challenge for you in designing this game? The biggest roadblock that came up?
Trying to figure out a way to make it unique and in a way that actually worked. So, because the thing is, so the initial mechanics, I knew right from the start, I wanted players to trade cards. I wanted those cards to be able to do something. And, you know, that was pretty much it. Like building off of that, it was like, okay, cool. We have this mechanic. We have ways that we think might work, but now we need to test it to make sure they actually do work. And so I'm actually really fortunate that my brother helped me out with that because he's very, very good at breaking things and finding the unfun combo potentials. So we had more than a few times where he'd be like, hey, I've got this deck. We need to try this out. And we'd try it. And 2 turns into the game, I'd be like, nope, I am changing that mechanic right now. Because this is horrible to play against. And really that is one of the overriding things that we want is we want players who play our game, you know, whether they win or lose, after the game is over, they'll feel like they had a chance. They'll feel like they did stuff and that, you know, if only they had just played that thing a little bit differently, they might have won. Because then they'll want to play again. Like it's no fun getting curb stomped by someone who just like takes you from 20 to 0 in 1 turn, right? Like that one shot kills are not fun. And that's, you know, that was probably the biggest and hardest challenge was ensuring that we had complex enough mechanics to where players who want to dive into those deeper layers can do so, but at the same time, making sure that those mechanics didn't allow for making the other person's game unenjoyable.
What's interesting to me is coming from such a different background than most game designers, and game designers can come from anywhere. Mike Fitzgerald, who did baseball highlights and a number of my other favorite games, was a radio DJ at one point. You have the NFL background, but everyone brings something to the table as far as that goes. When it comes to Twilight of the Gods, what part of that jock side of you had any sort of influence in this, if any?
The competitive side. So
okay, fair enough.
Yeah. So that's one of the things is that probably our biggest initial hurdle is people getting familiar with the systems in the game. And that if you've played games like Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon, you'll recognize a lot of stuff, but then you'll have to, you know, be familiar with the nomenclature. And then there's also another unique mechanic that we have is called sacrificing, where we have very few counter spells in the game. Instead, any player at any time can destroy any card that is in play or being played by sacrificing a number of their own resources equal to that card's printed casting cost. So what it means is that everyone has access to a counterspell, but it will always hurt you to use it. And figuring out the right time to use the sacrifice mechanic is the difference between winning and losing games. And what we found as, you know, obviously as we built the game and been testing it over and over and over is that the really super high level plays always involve the sacrifice mechanic. Like you always have to take it into account. And it can be different from game to game. Like, you know, if you're playing against a rush deck, it's like, okay, well, my opponent has these 2 pieces that are going to combo together to do something really bad for me, but I can sack a single tier 1 to get rid of one of those pieces. Yeah, I'm going behind a turn on resources, and it might be tougher. My opponent might not want to trade from me. I might have to seize, but I'm keeping that initial rush from getting started. like I'm keeping it from snowballing out of control. Whereas maybe it's in game, my opponent's about to play this huge kill spell. I think if I sack all my resources to stop it, I'm not going to have anything left, but all I need is one more turn, and then I win the game. And in testing, like 95% of our games have come down to a one-turn swing. It's either you win that turn or your opponent was going to win the next turn, which I think is really cool, because then it shows, okay, this is between the players. Like, this isn't RNG. I mean, and there is some RNG involved in, which cards you draw win. But at the end of the day, it's on you as a player to win the game. And I think that's where the competitive side comes out.
This game is already kickstarted. It's happening. You guys got a nice campaign going. Raised a little more than $75,000 to bring it to life. And as part of that, you're going to be punting a bunch of fruit.
Yes, I actually did that. What was that, 2 days ago, I think. That's going to be a pretty entertaining video, because that fruit got obliterated. It did not survive contact.
So for folks who don't know, if they got a certain backer level, for instance, at 1,125 backers, Chris had to punt a grape, and then there was a donation to a food drive as a result. There's a lime, a kiwi, a strawberry, a lemon, orange. I'm trying to see how far you guys got up to. You guys got up apple, and then grapefruit was the highest level. Okay.
Yeah, I think the only ones we missed were papaya, cantaloupe, and personal watermelon.
I cannot imagine the watermelon would have been fun.
Well, actually, so the watermelon I think would have been okay, because they're not quite as thick in terms of the outside, the outer shell. The cantaloupe probably would have hurt quite a bit.
Oof. Man, oh man.
So next Kickstarter, we'll see if we can break my foot.
Jeez. For folks who didn't get in on this one, and there's a way for them to get a copy of this. When's it set to release, and how can they go about getting it if they didn't get in on the Kickstarter campaign?
Yeah, so if they didn't get in on the Kickstarter campaign, they can just go to Victory Point Games' website, and they're taking essentially it's like a pre-order reservation thing. You just put $5 down, and then once it gets there, then you pay the rest and shipping, and it gets sent to you. And the game itself, hopefully by the end of this month. Apparently, the boat is on its way over from China, and barring any rogue icebergs or anything, I think it's supposed to get in within the next couple weeks. Then it's like a week or two for the distributors to get everything all set up, and then I think we should be getting them sent out to backers by the end of July. So obviously can't guarantee it with shipping being what it is, but that. Right now, that's what the schedule looks like. So yeah, if people want to play, by all means, go grab a set. And so for people who maybe don't know if they want to play this or not, but they have a play group, one of the things we did with the core set is that the 200 cards that it comes with are divided into 4 50-card pre-made decks that have all been balanced against each other. So if you and 3 friends say, hey, maybe we want to check this out, you each throw down $10, because I think it's like $39.99 is our retail. And then you each have a deck. And then maybe one of your friends doesn't like it. Maybe one of your friends really likes it. Now you start spreading cards around. Maybe you buy another core set. We wanted to make it easy for people to get into the game and to see if they liked it or not. And by having those pre-made decks, it takes a lot of the stress out of figuring out, okay, what cards go together, what does what. And we deliberately built some inefficiencies into the pre-made decks. So, I mean, these aren't amazing decks. They're still good decks. But you'll notice some of the cards, it's like, well, that card feels like it should go in this other deck. And that's because we want to push you into deck building. Because eventually we want you to be like, okay, I want to start, showing who I am as a player via the choice of cards that I use.
That sounds ideal for me as someone who could not play Magic to save my life because I was never capable of building any deck worth anything.
Right. Yeah. So and again, like that's where, if you just want this to be like a once a month thing, like you and your friends get together and play the pre-mades, that's fine. That's awesome. Like we want people to do that. If you want to take it to school or work or whatever, and pop out the decks and play someone during your break, fantastic. That's why we built it that way. And then for those players who do want to get into like the nitty gritty, peel back the layers of the onion to find out, okay, there's this combo and this combo, but what if I throw this card in and then it can do this? And then like we wanted to build a lot of depth into it to where, because that gives it replayability, right? Where you're like, okay, I've played this deck. I feel like I know it can do everything that it can do. But now I'm going to try a different deck, and I'm going to try putting these cards in, and I'm going to see what that does. And eventually, you get to the point where you're like, I can't wait for new cards because that allows me to do new things.
Nice. So moving off of Twilight of the Gods, Jeff Rademacher was curious about, are there any other board game concepts in the pipeline, things that you're working on?
Yeah, actually, I'm working on one with a buddy of mine from Minnesota, Andy Reiner. He was also in the band I was in, Tripping Acres, and he co-wrote Prime with me. He had an idea. It was funny, actually. He had we're really good friends. He had a dream one night that he was like, yeah, man, I had this dream last night where we made this board game and it was amazing, and we should do that. I'm like, all right, let's make a board game. So basically, we're that one's still in kind of the prototype stage right now. I think I've got it pretty close to completion, but there's still like some number crunching that needs to be done to make sure things are balanced. And it's more, so that one's more along the lines of kind of, House on Haunted Hill with the like tile placement, where
Yes,
essentially
yeah.
you kind of randomize the map every time. So this is like a mix between that and a cooperative / competitive dungeon crawler, in that you're going to be a group of people. You're trying to defeat this Grendel, right? You've all been cursed with this mark of this Grendel, and if you can't defeat it, it's going to drive you insane and you die. But in order to defeat it, you're going to have to acquire items, weapons, go defeat monsters, stuff like that. And the thing that, because I like making unique stuff, like I like doing stuff that hasn't been done. The thing that the game has is that everything you do costs you sanity. So like when you're using a weapon, when you're doing something, you gain madness. So madness is like negative victory points. And then eventually, once you hit a certain threshold, you can't really choose to cooperate anymore. If you're on the same space as another person, you have to attack them. So the co-op victory is everyone, works together to defeat the Grendel. The competitive victory is whoever has the least amount of madness at the end of the game. So you can, because I also love betrayal type games, right? Like how was it? Freaking, why am I blanking on the name? Yeah, Shadows over Camelot, and then the sci-fi one. Why can't I not remember?
Resistance?
No, not Resistance. It's the TV show. It's
Battlestar Galactica.
Yes, Battlestar Galactica. I was thinking like Battlefleet Gothic. I'm like, no, that's freaking more.
Not quite.
Yeah, but yeah, Battlestar Galactica, like, because I love trader games, right? Because you have the chance to screw over the other people, and then it adds that tension of, is everyone going to do what they say they're going to do? And so what I'm trying to build into this one is that people can betray each other, but at the same time, if the rest of the group really wants that co-op victory, there's ways to kind of bring the traitor back in line. So you have to choose the right moment if you're going to try to stab everyone in the back.
And timing is everything with those games for sure.
Yes.
A couple final questions. Scott Sexton was curious about your thoughts on inclusivity as it pertains to analog gaming. Certainly, a couple of the big issues we see there are there's some thoughts on there needs to be a greater push for more female designers, and then there's the other side of that, which is female depictions in games. So I don't know if you had any thoughts on where we're at as far as board games go in that arena.
Yeah, so it's getting a little better, but there's still a long way to go. I mean, that's actually one of the things I made a point of in Twilight of the Gods is when we met with the artist Clark for Victory Point Games, like the first thing I said to him was like, please no boob plate. He was like, yes, completely agree. So like, because one of the things that we want to portray, both in the game and just kind of in general, is that like anyone who plays this game should be able to find something in there that then they can identify with and recognize with. And since we are pulling from all sorts of different cultures, we should be respectful of those cultures. So, so that way it's not cultural appropriation. It's, okay, this is what that culture was like. This is what these beliefs were like. It's presented in an accurate way. And I think that's important because, from a social standpoint, the more inclusive you are, the stronger your community is. And then B, from a business standpoint, like if you make a game that appeals to a wide variety of people, that means more people are going to buy your game. Like it just makes fiscal sense. So I would say, to all those designers, if you're thinking of making games, like make sure that you make them accessible to lots and lots of people, because it's a good idea on both fronts. And then, yeah, I think we definitely need a lot more female game designers as well, too, because that's something where it doesn't matter, your gender, your sexual orientation, your religion, whatever it happens to be. If you want to play games, you should be allowed to play games. Like, that's the whole point of playing a game. Everyone gets to have fun.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. Two final questions, both more on the ridiculous end of things. Jeff Rademacher was curious. Would you rather play a social deduction game with the voice of a goat or a dexterity game with the body of a goat?
I'm going to have to go with the voice of the goat, because I can do a pretty good pretty good goat boy. I'm gonna be, I draw this card, and I'm going to play.
That was pretty solid.
Yeah, I'll go with the goat voice.
Nice. Okay. And then the final question we ask anyone on these Patreon interview episodes, now called Holding Court. If you could be any flavor of ice cream, which flavor would you be and why?
I'm gonna have to go with chocolate because it's the most delicious flavor. There's no other choice. All those other flavors are posers. It's chocolate.
But what is it about Chris Kluwe that would make you chocolate ice cream? Is it just that it's the best?
Because it's amazing. Have I mentioned I'm humble too?
Oh man, that's the most straightforward answer I've gotten to that question, but I think it's a perfectly fine one. Chris, thank you so much for your time. If folks want to reach out to you, get in touch with you, whatever the case may be, what's the best way for them to go about doing that?
The best way, and pretty much the only way, is on Twitter. I am at Chris Warcraft, and send me a message. I generally reply to pretty much all of them. Nice,
except for the mean ones or taunts relating to the Green Bay Packers.
Well, it depends. Sometimes I'll troll them, or I'll just block them. if it's funny, I'll play along.
Fair enough. Chris, thank you for your time, and best of luck with Twilight of the Gods. Excited to hopefully try it at some point soon.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me on, and really appreciate it.